Hello students, today we begin one of the most significant sections of your syllabus. This is important for you to understand as it pertains not only to two of the most bloody and violent conflicts in the history of mankind, the world wars, but also to the kind of horrific and systemic crimes against humanity that nations have inflicted on its own citizens in the name of aggressive racial nationalism. This episode marks a bitter and shameful time in human civilization, when the whole world watched in silence as millions of people were deprived of their right to property, to freedom, to resistance to oppression, and finally, their right to life itself. But before we go into the details of these crimes committed against civilians, we need to give you a background of the causes behind these events. As you all probably already know, the last century saw two world wars within a period of 20 years. The First World War fought from 1914 to 1918 between the Allied countries consisting of Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Serbia, Belgium, the US, Romania and Japan on one side, and the Central Powers, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire on the other side. The war had begun when the Austro-Hungarian heir, Archduke Francis Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian terrorist in Sarajevo on 28th June 1914, leading to a global conflict. Austria declared war on Serbia and the big powers of Europe eventually sided with one or the other faction. You must all be wondering why we started with the First World War, or the Great War as it has since come to be known as. The reason is that it is this war which sowed the seeds of the Second World War, an even bigger and more devastating conflict 20 years later. But how did this happen? How was one war responsible for another? This happened because the humiliating defeat of the Central Powers was rubbed on their faces by the Allies. The Allied countries were brutal in their retaliation and revenge on the defeated countries, especially making Germany pay a very heavy price for its role in the war. In the Treaty of Versailles that Germany was made to sign, a war guilt clause was included in the form of Article 231. This clause forced Germany and her allies to accept the responsibility for causing all the loss and damage during the war. Obviously, this was unfair as both sides had been responsible for the war, but Germany had to bear the most consequences. Having accepted responsibility for losses incurred in the war, it also had to pay war reparations or compensations to the victorious countries. This amount was a staggering £6.6 billion or 132 billion German marks. The other conditions of peace were also extremely harsh. Germany was forced to demilitarize and give up most of its army. It lost its overseas colonies, 1/10 of its population, 13% of its territories, 75% of its iron, and 26% of its coal to the Allied powers, especially France, Poland, Denmark, and Lithuania. Allied armies occupied the resource-rich Rhineland in Germany for the next decade. Meanwhile, the war had also taken other tolls on the German nation. The volatile political situation led to the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II and the formation of the Weimar Republic in Germany. The Weimar Republic had to face many initial hurdles. Although it had the support of the socialists, Catholics, and Democrats, it had to crush a Spartacist uprising led by communists who wanted a Bolshevik-style revolution in Germany. The Republic was so unpopular with the common people who held the government responsible for the defeat and humiliation in the Great War that its supporters came to be known as the November Criminals. This was because Germany had exceeded defeat in the war in November 1918. Added to this was the dire economic situation of Germany. Bearing heavy losses for the war, Germany had to keep paying hefty war penalties to the Allied nations, most of it in the form of gold. Gold reserves had depleted and Germany could no longer pay in 1923, in lieu of which the French occupied its industrial township of Ruhr. The situation became much worse when Germany took a passive-aggressive stance and printed way more paper currency than it should have, leading to rapid hyperinflation and the fall of the German currency value. By December 1923, the German mark was valued at 98,860,000 against $1. This wasn't the end of Germany's sufferings. In fact, it was only the beginning. Its greatest sympathizer, the United States, which had introduced the Dawes Plan to mitigate the harshness of the Versailles Treaty and rework Germany's war debts and penalties, faced the Wall Street crash and the ensuing Great Depression in economy from 1929 onwards. It is important to note why the support of the US was so crucial to Germany at that time. The Dawes Plan had achieved the following in favor of Germany. The Ruhr area was to be evacuated by foreign troops. Reparation payments would begin at 1 billion marks the first year and annually increase to 2.5 billion marks after 5 years. The Reichsbank would be reorganized under Allied supervision. Germany would be loaned about $200 million, mostly through Wall Street bonds issued in the US. The moment crisis hit Wall Street, the bonds loaned to Germany became redundant. The national income of the US fell by half, and it could no longer afford to forward loans for Germany's recovery. This global economic crisis also resulted in large-scale unemployment in Germany, with almost 6 million people left without jobs. By 1932, Germany's industrial output was reduced to 40% of what it had been in 1929. The salaried professionals and middle classes lost their savings with the fall of the German currency. They were stricken with fears of absolute poverty and of being reduced to the ranks of the labor class in a deeply divided society. During this time, the Weimar Republic was struggling with its coalitions, as achieving majority in the German parliament, known as the Reichstag, was a near impossibility. But the worst impediment to a democratic rule proved to be Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This allowed the president, under certain circumstances, to take emergency measures without the prior consent of the parliament. Students, you shall very soon understand the importance of Article 48 and how it facilitated the rise of Adolf Hitler, the fanatic nationalist leader of the Nazi Party in Germany in the early 1930s. For now, we leave you to debate whether any constitution should allow for a general emergency to be declared so that powerful people can easily suspend civil liberties and rights and oppress people in the name of law. We shall see you soon in the second part of our video lesson on Nazism and the rise of Hitler.